Hello everyone. Welcome back to another video in the Let's Solve Tactics series. So it's been a couple weeks since I recorded one of these, and also outside there is something going on, so you may hear a bit of background noise which is outside my control. But okay, let's get started. Okay, so we left off when I had reached 1800 on chess.com tactics trainer. So, okay, we start off with a pawn in game. I'm playing white. You know the drill. You know, hit the pause button if you would like to solve yourself. So, okay, the first obvious question is, do I take the pawn or not? So often in these king and pawn endgames, I think the there are a few key concepts that we need to know. And for this pawn on f4, the white pawn that is, uh, really to win. Uh, My king will need to reach one of these three squares. Those are called the key squares. So the e6, f6, and g6 squares. And if I'm able to reach those with my king, if my king can occupy one of those three squares while the pawn is on f4, I'll eventually be able to win this. So, okay, let's calculate. So if I take on d5, I take the opposition. So if you see, if I capture the pawn on d5, the kings will be facing each other and it'll be black's turn to move, which means white has the opposition. So he'll probably go to e7 and I will go to e5. Then if he goes to f7, I go to f5. And in that position, wherever he goes, so with the white king on f5 and the black king on f7, it's black's move and I have the opposition. So if he goes to uh, e7, I go to g6, and if he goes to g7, I go to e6. So I will occupy one of these, either of these squares, depending on how black moves, and that should be a win. So okay, so looks like taking the pawn works. So okay, as discussed, we are going down, and it didn't make me play any further, but yeah, I'm sure a lot of you know this, so this is probably elementary. So yeah. In case you do not, I will analyze this for those of you who are maybe newer to the game or not familiar with the uh, theory of king and pawn endgames. So this is a good endgame to know. So I'll just analyze this for you and see how white will eventually win. So let's say he goes this way, then I occupy one of these key squares as I mentioned. And now, yeah, black actually loses by force. So here what am I supposed to do? I think whatever I do wins, but okay, I can take opposition once more. Wherever he goes, I can come here. And now, if you notice, with my king on e7, these three squares are controlled. So my next four moves are simply f5, f6, f7, f8, queen. And that plan cannot be stopped by black. So, yeah, something like this. And yeah, next move is queen, so I win. Okay, let's keep going. Also, I've decided that I'll try to keep these videos close to half hour rather than making them too long. Let's see how we do on that plan, but that's the plan at least. Okay, so black to move. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. So what's going on in this position? Looks like equal material. I have a knight versus his bishop. The white king seems very restricted. It only has the h2 square to move to, and also my knight and this f6 rook and the queen have some influence on his king position. So okay, that's one factor. The queen, the white queen that is, looks pretty short of squares, so could be trapped maybe. Also, of course, knight g3 is a fork between the king and the rook, so that's important. Anything else? I don't really know. So let's look at some candidate moves. So knight to g3 check is a check, so and a fork, so very forcing. That's a candidate. Rook g6, attacking the queen with the rook is also very forcing. With the other rook, I don't really see too much. I could try some rook to d5, threatening a discovery with my knight. That could be interesting. And with the queen, I can give a check on g1, but I don't think that works. So, okay, with those, I will start with knight g3 check. So, if he doesn't capture, then he has to go to h2. The king has to go to h2, and I will take the rook with check. That should be good enough. So he does capture, I guess. Knight g3 check, bishop takes g3. And now, what do I have there? Hmm, if I go if I go rook g6 right there, do I achieve anything? Let's see. Rook g6, he can always take on h4 with his queen, or move the queen elsewhere. And it's not very clear what I'm doing. I can, yeah, if he takes on h4, he's not obliged to. He's up a knight at that point, and he can let me just recapture. So not very clear. After knight g3 check, bishop takes g3, rook g6 is not clear. And if I just take back on uh, g3 with the pawn, also not sure what I'm achieving. So what if I start with rook g6? What happens then? Rook g6, the queen is attacked. The queen can either capture my knight, or it can go to h5. If it goes to h5, do I have something nice? Hmm. Not sure. Knight g3 check, bishop takes g3, h3 could be interesting, but also slow. But the main continuation is after rook g6. What if he takes my knight with the queen? So rook g6, I go rook g6. He takes my knight. Then what happens? Hmm. Also, I just noticed. No, sorry, no, I don't notice anything. Okay. Uh, let's see. In that position, do I have something? Nothing jumps out at me. I can go back rook to f6, but seems like I may be missing the point. I don't know. Okay. Now rook to d5 was another interesting move, threatening knight to g3 check. So we are threatening to win the queen after rook d5. So after rook d5, he can move his queen to g4. That's possible. But if the queen moves to g4, then I could go rook g6. And now my knight on f5 is protected by my rook. So he'll have to go to h5. And what do I have there? If knight g3 check right there, bishop g3. I do feel I'm getting close, but I don't have it figured out yet. Rook d5, queen g4. Now what are my moves in this position? Rook g6 seems correct, because if I play knight g3 check right away after queen g4, then the queen can escape along the... can it escape? The queen has the c8 square available to check me. So I was looking at rook d5, threatening knight g3 check. The king could simply move. That's another option. Oops. Let's click somewhere. Okay. If the king simply moves, then maybe I go. Where do I go? Hmm. Maybe I go knight e3, protecting my rook and hitting his rook and hitting his queen. Maybe that will win an exchange. So after rook d5, queen g4 seems correct to me. But after queen g4, rook g6. Now he has bishop g5 or queen h5. After queen h5, where is my win? Oh, after queen h5, I have knight g3. Check. Right, right. Okay. So rook d5 maybe is correct. Maybe I'm getting this wrong, but oh well. We have spent a long time. Rook d5 seems to be the right move to me. Let's look at rook g6 again right away. He takes my knight. Not sure what my follow-up is. Taking on g2 doesn't make sense. Knight g3 right away he takes. Again, I don't see a follow-up. I think I'm gonna go with this move. Let's see. So far so good. Okay. Okay, so he is allowing me to execute my threat. So my follow-up would be knight g3 check. So trying to win the queen. If the bishop captures, I win the queen. If the king moves, I win the queen. And if the king takes the knight, I take the knight back. And this rook e1 doesn't threaten me because I have the h7 square where my king can escape. I think I'll just do this and take this. Okay, so far so good. So I'm curious if after, did I get the analysis correct? So rook d5. Queen g4 was what I was thinking. The computer doesn't agree. And here this, and the point was, if here then again knight g3 and I'm winning the queen next. But king h2 and then rook g6, queen h5. I hadn't anticipated rook g6. I think if king h2, I was planning to go knight e3, which is also somewhat winning. Not the best, but okay, fine. Let's keep going. Okay, another king and pawn endgame. So yeah, seems like we'll get a king and pawn endgame lesson in this course, but this time, not course, in this video. This time I'm on the losing side or defending side. So clearly black has an extra passed pawn on e3 and he's pushing it forward. So the question is, how do we defend? And also there are these two pawns on a4, a5, which black will be able to pick off my a4 pawn as well. So yeah, my pawn cannot move. So the question is, where do I move the king? Okay. Generally, the advice is, in such situations, you move straight back with your king. So straight back would be like that, straight back, not diagonally, straight back. But let's see if that works. So if I go to e1, so there are two approaches, I think, that black can take. He can hold on to his pawn and try to do something with the pawn. So king d3 would be the move there. Or he can abandon the e3 pawn and say he'll try to win with the a pawn. So let's look at the other approach, abandoning the pawn approach first. So king e1, king c4, I go up, he goes b4, I take, he takes my pawn on a4. Now I have to run to the corner. So king d2, king b3, king c1. And yeah, I am actually in time. So that will be a draw. So if he abandons the e3 pawn after king e1, I'm still able to collect the e3 pawn and make a draw, because with the rook pawns, with the a pawns, I'll have stalemate tricks. So if after king e1, king d3, then king d1, pawn to e2 check, king e1, king e3, that's a stalemate. So king e1 seems to work, I think. I'm going to play that. Other moves do not make sense. King f3, of course, king d3, and I'm unable to stop the pawn. And yeah, so okay. And now I just oppose again. And I think, yeah, the main thing it's testing us on is just move straight back. Don't, do anything fancy. And we got the problem correct. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so why to play? Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. So first thing I notice is really this alignment of the rook with his queen. Okay. Other than that, also the queen is very trapped. Really has e5 and e3 squares available right now to go to. Also b4, so it's not as trapped as I thought. Okay. Hmm. Other things. Hmm. I mean, there is this battery of my queen and bishop. Not sure if that's relevant. Also, I was briefly thinking about e5, pushing the pawn to e5, but I realized that my rook on f4 is hanging. So, okay, with that, I'm going to start looking at some forcing moves. So, knight to f3 attacking the queen is definitely a candidate move. Pawn to e5 is a candidate since it hits the queen again. And also could be knight to e2, can be a candidate, hitting the queen again. So clearly we are targeting the queen here. Any other moves? Um, I mean, rook takes knight, etc. I don't think work. Knight to b5 could be considered, but okay, I'm going to start there. So, okay, let's look at knight to f3. Let's see where the queen goes. The queen can go to, I think, b4 or e3. So if it goes to b4, then I think he's clearly escaping. And yeah, I can try to stop it from escaping by going to, let's say, b5 with my bishop or knight. But it is not clear to me if we are winning the queen somehow. So if I play pawn to e5, sacrificing my rook, he can take the rook or take the pawn on e5 or go to e3. So a lot of options. So let's say he takes the rook. Pawn to e5, queen takes f4. At a minimum, I could take the knight. That brings me to the material balance, which is, I think, probably roughly equal at this moment. Okay, so pawn to e5, queen takes rook. Now, where all can the queen go? The queen can always capture e5. So I can take the knight, but that already doesn't feel right. Okay, so not pawn to e5, not knight f3. Clearly missing something. Knight e2, maybe? Knight e2 protects my rook on... okay, I think that may be it. So knight e2 protects my rook on f4 and attacks the queen. So now the queen again has options. So after knight e2, he can go to e5, whereupon knight to f3, I think, traps the queen. Yeah. So knight to e2, queen to e3 is possible. If queen to e3, where can the queen go at that point? It can not move anywhere. So how do we attack it is the question. Maybe knight to f1 at that point. So knight e2, queen e3, knight f1. Oh, then queen is not trapped, is it? Yeah, I think it is. Okay, so that doesn't work for black. Sorry. So now knight e2, queen b4. I think this is the main point. Now I have e5, attacking the queen using the rook, which is protected, and also attacking the knight. When the queen moves, I win the knight. Okay, so I feel good about knight e2. I'm going to play it. Knight e2, and now this move. And we are going to win either the knight or the queen. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, some kind of an endgame where black has an extra bishop, but I have this very active rook on the 7th rank on b7, and I also have an advanced pawn on a6, which could be useful maybe. So positionally speaking, doubling on the 7th with putting both rooks on the 7th rank would be very desirable right here, because rooks on the 7th rank are very powerful. Uh, Also, there could be mating ideas against the king, because the king is cut off. The king is not able to come up from the 8th rank. Black himself has a check on b2. That's possible. He's also, of course, attacking both the pawns on a6 and d3. So, okay. But I also, of course, notice the alignment of the king and the rook on h8, which is hanging. Uh, the other rook on b4 is also hanging, but I don't think we are able to take advantage of that. So in terms of candidates, rook takes pawn on a7 definitely comes to mind. It threatens a skewer with rook to a8. Looks very forcing. Also, I protect my a6 pawn, so very desirable that way. Other moves. Hmm. Other moves, yeah, of course, rook to c1 check, which now looks very appealing. Rook to c1 check is a check and very forcing. The king has to move, or he has to block with the bishop, or the rook for that matter. If he blocks with the bishop on c6, I just take the bishop, and he moves to d8, and yeah, I'm already doing very well. If he blocks on c4, I again can take, trade rooks, and even in that endgame, I'm doing really well with my very active rook and about to capture a7. So rook c1 check, king d8 looks, like a move, but then I have rook b8 check, skewering and winning his rook. And whenever rook d2 check happens, I think I have enough squares with my king. g3 or e3 should be okay. So rook c1 check looks appealing. Any other? Is rook takes a7 better for some reason? Rook takes a7. He can always throw in a check on d2, and if I block it, he can take on e2 and then check me again with the other rook. So that looks more complicated. Rook c1 check has to be correct, I think. So far so good. Now I was thinking just rook b8 and winning the rook in the corner. Just pausing to see if there is anything better. I don't see anything better, so I'm gonna play the move. And let's pause another time. Still nothing better, just take the rook. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, a dangerous looking position. Black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. White has two rooks against my one, and also he's threatening some, you know, not so nice things, against my king with his queen and rook all being there. Okay, so this seems like a very urgent situation for me. If I take his rook with my rook, then queen recaptures with a mate, so that's not good. Yeah, so as I said, desperate situation. Okay, so then what do we do? Let's see, do we have any checks of my own? Capturing his rook on g7 this way is the check, but then yeah, he captures with his queen, and that's mate. Is he also threatening some mate immediately? Maybe rook takes. He's also, of course, I cannot ignore the fact that he's threatening my rook, the only rook that I have, apart from some kind of mating ideas, maybe. Okay, so let's see what kind of candidate moves can we have here. Queen to g8 is an idea, just very radical, trying to pin his rook. Queen g8. He can take my rook on e7 with the rook on c7. So I'm looking at queen g8, rook takes rook, and no stalemates. So yeah, I'm already lost right there. So that doesn't work. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Maybe queen takes this rook. Queen takes rook, that is. Queen takes c7. So queen takes c7. Now he has a lot of interesting forcing moves possible. So if queen takes rook, of course he can take my queen back with his queen. And in that position, yeah, I could take his rook on g7, and then I will be okay, at least okay in the sense I'll not have imminent danger. And also if I look at the position more, you know, holistically, there is this asset, this a pawn that is running down the board or could be running down the board, where if I play a5, or even right now, like if I play a5, the king will be outside the square of the pawn, so I will be able to make a queen. If I, manage to trade all these, win the rook, and get rid of all these attacking pieces, then I'll be able to win the game with my a pawn. So that's interesting. Okay, so queen takes rook looks very appealing. So queen takes rook, and if he takes my queen, then I think I have rook takes g7 check. So because it's a check, yeah, his best move is to take my rook with his queen check, and then I recapture. And then white doesn't have any passed pawns of his own, so he probably tries to run towards this corner. So king f1 and a5, and already uh, even king e1, a4, and yeah, he's just outside the. Is he outside? Let's look at that actually. King e1, a4, king d1, a3, king c1, a2, king b2, and he holds. He holds the pawn, but I don't think the point of the tactic is to win the game, but it is rather to, that I've managed to defend. So okay, so queen takes rook. Queen takes rook doesn't work, so he has to try some other moves. Oops, sorry. So after queen takes rook, what else can I do? Let's see. Um, he can, yeah, he can take my rook with his rook. So rook takes e7 check. But now I have queen takes queen, so that works for me. He also may have rook g8 check, but again, well, this time it's a double check, so my king has to move. But now, yeah, he doesn't. He has again queen g3 check, but I can always block with my rook, and I think that might be correct. Rook takes h7 check also doesn't lead to anything. Yeah, I feel good about this move. Yeah, let's play it. Okay, so far so good. And now this important move. Take the rook with check. Okay. And I'm curious. I don't think I'm winning the pawn endgame, am I? So he takes, he runs, king f1. Yeah, it doesn't say. And black is winning better, but it's not like I'm not promoting the pawn. No. So whatever I did, I think the analysis holds up. If I just rush with the pawn, he's in time to catch the pawn. Okay, good. So let's do maybe one more, and then I think we are close to our time limit. Okay, interesting position, black to move. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. So a lot of rooks are hanging in this problem. So to start with, I think in this position, let's see. I'm down a pawn at the moment. So yeah, so he is attacking this rook this way and also this rook this way. So that is wonderful. And also there is this b pawn, which may promote in two moves, possibly. So okay. So I see one solution which might be good enough. It is uh, rook check, so that I remove my hanging rook, and then he can, deal with the check in many ways. He can block with his rook, or move the king, or block with his knight, or whatever he does. If he blocks with his rook, I trade rooks, and then finally the point is I'll be able to take his c4 rook for free. And then, but it's not yet over, because then he has, with my rook on c4, he has pawn to b7. Once pawn to b7 happens, I don't have the b4 square for my rook, so rook to b4, because the knight controls that square. But I do have bishop d6 controlling the b8 square, and I should be able to stop the pawn, and with an extra rook I should win. So that looks correct to me. Yeah, I don't think I'll look at anything else. Check here, and now here. Okay, and I've stopped the pawn, and with an extra rook I'll be winning. Okay, guys, I think we'll stop the session there. We reached 1841, and next time we'll, make a run for 1900. Hopefully, you enjoyed this tactics session. Yeah, if you liked it or you did not, comment below and like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.